South Africa's constitution
is hailed as one of the most progressive in the world, protecting a wide range of fundamental rights. But rights are not absolute. In certain
cases,
rights can be limited.
Section 26
of the Constitution, known as the General Limitations Clause, provides the framework for when and how rights may be restricted. Welcome back to City Education, your home for education in all forms,
shapes, and sizes.
In today's video, we'll be focusing on the limitation of rights.
Section 36 of our Constitution, the Limitations Clause.
Let's get into it.
So
why do we need a limitation clause at all? Well, the Bill of Rights contains strong protections for human dignity, freedom, and equality. But no right
can be absolute.
Without limits, rights could collide in ways that undermine justice and democracy. Currie and Waal explain that the General Limitation Clause in Section 36
performs two functions.
Firstly, it reconciles individuals' rights with collective interests. For example, your right to freedom of expression cannot extend to hate speech or incitement of violence because that would violate the rights and dignity of others. Secondly, it ensures accountability and justification.
The state cannot
simply limit rights because it wishes to do so. It must demonstrate that the limitation is reasonable and justifiable. Section 36 thus creates a framework for courts to hold the legislature and executive accountable. This reflects the idea of constitutional democracy. Rights are real, powerful, and enforceable, but they exist within a community where competing interests must be harmonized. Currie and Waal describe Section 36 as a proportionality to choose. It does not ask simply whether a right is limited, but whether the limitation strikes an appropriate balance between the importance of protecting the right and the legitimate aims
pursued by the limitation.
In other words, Section 36 embodies the principle that carry both freedoms and responsibilities.
The state must respect and
protect rights, but individuals also live within a society where the rights of others matter equally. The purpose of Section 36
is to
ensure that any limitation of rights is not arbitrary, but is instead a carefully justified measure
that
serves the values of dignity, equality, and freedom at the heart of South Africa's constitutional order.
Section 36 of the Constitution
provides a clear framework for limiting rights. Let's break it down step by step. Step 1. The law of general application. Section 36 requires that any limit must be imposed by a law of general application.
This means that
limitation cannot be arbitrary or target a specific individual unfairly.
It must
apply generally to all people in similar situations. For example, a law that regulates
speech
in public spaces applies to everyone. It's a law of general application. A law that prohibits a specific person from speaking would not meet this requirement. Currie and Waal note that this requirement ensures legal certainty and fairness.
Individuals should
know in advance which laws may restrict their rights. Step 2 must be reasonable and justifiable in an open and democratic society. The limitation must be both reasonable and justifiable in a democratic society based on human dignity, equality, and freedom. Reasonable means the limitation is rationally connected to its purpose. Justifiable means the limitation pursues an important social goal. The courts have emphasized that this is not a mere formality. Every limitation must be carefully assessed.
For instance, in Prince versus President Cape Law Society,
the limitation of religious freedom was justified because it served the important public health goal of confronting harmful drugs. Step 3. The proportionality factors. Currie and Waal identify 5 factors that collectively determine whether limitation is proportional. These are also determined or covered by the Constitution under the
same Section 36.
Now, in order to determine whether a limitation is proportionate, the court must first look at the nature of the right. Some rights, such as human dignity of life, are fundamental and may require stronger protection than others, like property rights. Number 2. Importance of the purpose. Now, the limitation must serve a significant objective, such as public safety national security, or protecting the rights of others. Know the extent of the limitation. Here, we ask, how far does the limitation infringe on the right? A minor restriction may be justified, but a severe restriction must meet a very strong purpose. Know 4. Relation between the limitation and the purpose. There must be a rational connection. The limitation must genuinely advance the purpose and must not be merely symbolic obscurity. Number 5. Last restrictive means. Now here the courts must consider whether the objective could be achieved through measures that restrict the rights less severely. If such a measure exists, the current limitation may be unconstitutional. Now finally, step 4, balancing competing interests. Section 36 requires a weighing exercise. The court balances the importance of the right against the purpose of the limitation. But both is the heart of proportionality. No right is absolute, but no limitation should unduly erode fundamental freedoms. In short, the scopes of Section 36 ensures that rights are robustly protected, but also flexible enough to accommodate legitimate societal needs. It sets out a rational, transparent, and fair framework for courts to assess when limitations are permissible. With this framework, significant courts can protect fundamental freedoms while ensuring that individual rights do not undermine the greater good of society. The Brennan's case involved a Rastafarian, the Prince, who argued that criminalizing cannabis infringed his rights to freedom of religion under Section 15 of the Constitution. The Constitutional Court was asked to determine whether this limitation was justifiable under Section 36. Let's walk through the court analysis. The court first identified the right in question, freedom of religion, a fundamental right that protects the belief and practices of a person. It was important to note that identifying the specific aspect of the right affected is crucial for the proportionality analysis. Here, it was the use of Tenable's inverse rituals. Next, the court confirmed that the law criminalizing cannabis was a law of general application. It applied to all South Africans and was not arbitrary or targeted. Both satisfied the requirement of Section 36. Afterwards, the court then considered the purpose of the limitation. The state's objective was to control the use of harmful drugs and protect public health. Even though the law restricted Prince's religious practice, the court found that the purpose was important in a democratic society. Limiting a religious practice to be justified, it serves a broader societal goal. After that, the court examined the extent of the limitation. In this case, the law completely prohibited the use of cannabis for religious rituals. That was a state or absolute infringement, but not absolute. Religious belief itself was untouched. Only a specific practice was limited. The court then assessed whether the limitation was rationally connected to its purpose. Here, criminalizing cannabis directly advanced public health objectives. There was a clear and logical link between the limitation and the source or goal. Finally, the court considered if there was a less restrictive way to achieve this purpose. Could persons be allowed to use cannabis for religious purposes without threatening public health? The court concluded that allowing exemptions would be impractical and difficult to enforce. Therefore, no less restrictive measures were realistically available. Step 7. The balancing interests. After applying all the Section 36 factors, the court performed a balancing exercise. The infringement on Pence's religious practices was weighed against the importance of protecting public health. The court concluded that the limitation was reasonable and justifiable under Section 36. The Prince case demonstrates that Section 36 is not just a legal formality, it is a practical tool for balancing rights and social interests, ensuring that limitations are carefully justified rather than arbitrary. Another thing to note is that cannabis is legal now, and this is a 2002 case, so don't take it too hard. Now, let's look at the Satawu vs. Garvas case. In Satawu vs. Garvas, the Constitutional Court considered the liability of trade unions for damages caused during strikes and protest actions. The unions argued that strict liability limited their right to strike and protest, protected under Section 23 of the Constitution. The court needs
Section 36
to determine whether the limitation on the right to protest was reasonable and justifiable. The first step, as usual, was to identify the right. The court first identified the right in question, the right to strike and engage in protest action. This right is fundamental to collective bargaining and the promotion of workplace democracy. Careful consideration of the right is essential. Here, it was not just participation in a strike, but rather participation without bearing unlimited liability for unintended damages.
Step 2.
Importance of the limitation's purpose. The limitation, which was the imposition of strict liability on unions, was designed to protect public safety and ensure accountability. The court recognized that strikes could sometimes escalate into situations causing damage to property or the public. The purpose was therefore highly important in a democratic society, aiming to balance economic and social stability with individual and collective rights. Step 3. Extent of the limitation. The court examined the extent of the limitation. Strict liability imposed a heavy burden on trade unions, as they could be held financially responsible for damages even if they took reasonable steps to prevent harm. Despite the severity, the limitation did not eliminate the right to strike. Unions could still organize and participate in protest actions. The right was limited, but not destroyed. Step 4. Relation between the limitation and purpose. The court assessed the rational connection between the limitation and its purpose. Imposing liability directly advanced the objective of deterring harmful conduct and encouraging unions to take reasonable preventative measures. This connection was clear and logical, satisfying the Section 36 requirement that the limitation must serve its independent purpose. Step 5. Consideration of a less restrictive means. The court considered whether there were less restrictive means to achieve the same goal, so public safety be protected without imposing strict liability. The court concluded that alternatives were inadequate. For example, limiting liability only to neglect acts would fail to fully deter potential harm and protect third parties affected by strikes. Thus, strict liability, though burdensome, was necessary and proportionate to achieve the public interest. Finally, the court performed a balancing exercise. On one side, the collective right to protest, crucial for democratic expression. On the other side,
the state's duty
to protect property and the public. The court held that the limitation was proportionate, as it advanced a legitimate purpose without entirely neglecting the right to strike. This reflects Section 36's principle that limitations must be reasonable, justifiable, and minimally impair the right. Now, the Satawu vs. Garvas case, it demonstrates that Section 36 is a dynamic, context-sensitive
tool. Even significant
and limitations on fundamental rights can be justified when the purpose is compelling, the connection is rational, and less restrictive options are inadequate. Now, we've seen how Section 36 was applied in Prince
and
Satawu versus Garvas.
Step back
and draw out some key themes from Currie and Duvall's Bill of Rights Handbook. No run rights are not absolute. Currie and Duvall emphasize that no right in the Constitution is absolute. Every right exists in a society where it must be balanced against the rights of others and the broader public interest. The limitation clause is therefore not an exception to rights. It is an integral part of the rights framework. No. 2. Proportionality as the central test. The heart of Section 86 is the principle of proportionality. Courts do not simply ask, is the right infringed? Rather, they ask, is this limitation justified in light of its purpose? This involves weighing the nature of the right against the importance of the limitation's purpose and examining the extent of the intrusion. In Prince, the court found that religious freedom could be limited to protect public health. On Satawu versus Garvas, the court found that protest rights could be limited to ensure accountability and safety. Both judgments reflect proportionality in action. No. 3. Context matters. Now, Currie and Duvall highlight that limitations must always be evaluated in context. This means that the same right may be limited differently based on the circumstances. For example,
Restrictions
on free expression during wartime might be stricter than in peacetime. The contextual approach ensures that rights are not applied in abstract, but in the real world where competing interests must be managed. No. 4. Judicial discipline and justification.
Section 36
Requires courts to give extra justification for limiting rights. Both promotes judicial discipline and prevents arbitrary decision-making. The court must clearly know the purpose of the limitation, the factors considered, and why the balance struck is reasonable and justifiable. Both structured reasoning enhances transparency, legitimacy, and accountability through constitutional adjudication. Number 5. The rule of less restrictive means. Now, Currie and Waal says that the state bears a burden to show that less restrictive alternatives are not available. In Prince, the court considered but rejected the idea of religious exemptions for cannabis. In Satawu vs. Garvas, the court held that negligence-based liability would not adequately protect the public. This ensures that the rights are limited only as far as truly necessary. No. 6. Balancing as a constitutional value. Ultimately, Section 36 reflects a constitutional culture of balance. Rights are protected robustly, but not in a way that undermines democracy, equality, or the rights of others. Currie and Waal explained that this balancing act is what makes constitutional rights workable in practice. They are strong, but never unqualified. In short, Section 36 is not about weakening rights. It is about making them practical, balanced, and sustainable within South Africa's constitutional democracy. In conclusion, understanding Section 36 reminds us that the Constitution is not only about protecting rights,
but also
about fostering a just and democratic order. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, see, and subscribe. This is City Education, your home for knowledge in all forms, shapes, and sizes.